I found my son-in-law's car in my driveway at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, which wouldn't have meant anything except my daughter was supposed to be at work, and so was he. I sat in my truck for a moment, just sat there with the engine idling, looking at that silver Audi parked crooked the way he always parked it, like the lines in a driveway were suggestions. I had come home early because my knee was acting up, and I didn't feel like pretending otherwise at the hardware store another 3 hours. 63 years old, and my body has started filing complaints I can't ignore. I should tell you something about me before I go further. I spent 31 years working in commercial insurance. I am not a dramatic man. I don't make scenes. My late wife, God rest her, used to say I had the emotional range of a parking meter. She meant it as a criticism, but honestly I took it as a compliment. I think clearly under pressure. I always have. So I did not charge through the front door. I sat in my truck and I thought. My daughter had been married to him for 4 years. She was 31. He was 34. They lived 40 minutes away in a newer subdivision, the kind with all the houses in shades of gray and taupe, where every garage door looks identical. She worked in hospital administration. He was in commercial real estate, which meant he wore expensive shoes and talked about square footage the way other men talk about sports. I had never warmed to him. I want to be honest about that. There was something in the way he looked at things, at my house, at my truck, at the way I dressed, like he was quietly calculating the deficit. He was never rude to my face. He was never anything to my face except pleasant in the practiced way of someone who has learned that pleasantness is useful. But I have spent 3 decades reading people across negotiating tables, and I know the difference between a man who respects you and a man who has decided you don't matter enough to disrespect openly. My daughter loved him, or I believed she did. That is what I kept telling myself those first 4 years. That whatever my reservations were, they were mine to manage, and she was happy, and a father's job eventually becomes stepping back. So I stepped back. I got out of the truck. I did not use my key immediately. I walked around to the side of the house first, to the kitchen window, which looks out over the back patio. Old habit. I used to do it when my daughter was a teenager and I suspected a party. She caught me twice. She never let me forget it. The kitchen was empty. I went to the front door and I used my key quietly. My knee was hurting, but I moved carefully. The hallway was dim. A bag, not my daughter's usual bag, the big canvas one she carries everywhere, was sitting near the bottom of the stairs. A woman's bag, brown leather with a gold clasp. Smaller, more expensive looking. My wife's bag. I stood there for what felt like a long time but was probably 4 seconds. My wife worked Tuesdays. She taught 2nd grade. School didn't let out for another hour and 40 minutes. She had been teaching for 22 years. She had never once come home early on a Tuesday without calling me first. I am going to tell you what I did, and I need you to understand I was not operating on suspicion at this point. I was operating on a feeling so far below suspicion that it didn't have a name yet. It was more like the moment before you understand something has gone wrong, when your body knows but your mind is still insisting on alternate explanations. I went back outside. I walked to my truck. I got in, and I drove 2 blocks away to the little park where parents take their kids after school, and I sat there, and I called my daughter. She picked up on the 2nd ring. Hey. Dad. Hey, sweetheart, just checking in. I kept my voice completely even. Parking meter, like Elaine always said. How's your day? Busy. We had a budget meeting all morning. I'm eating lunch at my desk. A pause. I could hear background noise. A keyboard. An intercom. Distant. She was at work. You okay? You don't usually call in the middle of the day, knees bothering me. Came home early. Oh, you should ice it. She said it automatically, the way she always does, the same way her mother used to. Dad, I have to get back. Can I call you tonight? Of course, I said. Love you too. I hung up. I sat there in that park with the engine off and a pair of Canadian geese walking across the grass like they owned the whole county. And I thought about the brown leather bag with the gold clasp. I thought about how long I had been married to the woman who owned it. 38 years. 38 years, and I could identify her bag from 20 feet away in a dim hallway, the same way I could identify her handwriting on a grocery list, or the specific way she'd sigh when something on television disappointed her. I drove back to the house. His car was still there. I went inside. I moved quietly, not because I was sneaking, but because that is how I move when my knee is bad, carefully, with weight on the good side. I went into the kitchen. and I poured myself a glass of water, and I drank it standing at the sink, looking out at the back patio, at the garden Elaine had spent every spring of the last decade building into something genuinely beautiful. Roses along the fence, tomatoes in raised beds, a stone path she'd laid herself, one piece at a time on weekends. I heard them before I saw them, not what you're imagining. Voices. Just voices, from the direction of the living room, the kind of quiet, close conversation that carries a particular texture you recognize without being able to make out words. A particular texture I recognized. I set my glass down on the counter. I walked to the doorway of the living room, and I stood there. My wife was on the sofa. My son-in-law was beside her, and his hand was on her knee, and she was leaning into him in the particular way she used to lean into me 20 years ago, when we were newer to each other, and everything still felt urgent. Neither of them saw me. I watched for probably 3 seconds. Then I walked back to the kitchen, out through the side door, down the driveway, and I got in my truck. I drove to the park. I sat there for 45 minutes. The geese were still there. I did not call my wife. I did not call my son-in-law. I did not do anything dramatic or immediate, because I was 63 years old, and I had spent 31 years in commercial insurance, and I understood, at a very fundamental level, that the first move you make after discovering something this large is almost always the one you regret. I called my daughter instead. Dad, I said I'd call you ton. I need you to meet me. I said, not tonight now. A pause. Then quieter, what happened? I'll tell you when I see you. Are you able to get away for an hour? Another pause. Longer. Yes, she said. And the way she said it, without asking why, without pushing back, just yes, told me something I hadn't expected to know. She already knew something was wrong. We met at a diner 12 minutes from her office. She was there when I arrived, which meant she had left as soon as we hung up. She had ordered us both coffee without asking. She looked like her mother when she was concentrating on something difficult, that same particular set of the jaw, that same habit of turning a spoon over and over in her fingers. I sat down across from her. I told her exactly what I had seen. No embellishment, no emotion, not on the outside. Just what I saw, where, and when. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she set the spoon down carefully on the saucer, and she looked at me across the table and she said, Dad, I've known for 8 months. 8 months. She had found messages on his phone. She had been trying to understand what to do about it. She had not come to me because she did not want to put something on me she couldn't take back. Her words, exactly. She knew what it would do to me. She had been trying to handle it quietly, she said. She had been talking to an attorney. She had been talking to an attorney for 6 weeks. I looked at my daughter sitting across from me in that diner booth, with her coffee going cold, and this thing she had been carrying for 8 months written all over her face, and I felt something I can only describe as the floor, dropping out from under, everything I thought I understood about my family. Not just the marriage, all of it, the geometry of it. Who knew what, who was protecting whom, and from what, and why? Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because she's your wife, my daughter said, and I didn't know what you would do. That hit me somewhere specific, because she was right. I didn't know what I would have done 8 months ago. I wasn't sure I knew what I was going to do now. What I knew was this. My wife had been conducting this, whatever it was, whatever we were calling it, in my house. My house. The house I had paid for and maintained and kept up for 31 years. The house where my daughter had grown up, where we had brought her home from the hospital, where every Thanksgiving and Christmas and birthday for 3 decades had happened. She had brought him here, she had done it here, and he had done it in my house while planning, apparently, to remain married to my daughter. My daughter's attorney had told her something that was still reverberating in my head as I drove home that night. He had, methodical, this son-in-law of mine. He had, in the 4 years of their marriage, systematically shifted assets. Joint accounts drained slowly, over time, in amounts small enough not to trigger immediate alarm. A small business he'd started 2 years in, structured in a way that made his income appear modest on paper. My daughter's name was on the house. His name was on almost nothing. He had been planning an exit for years. What he hadn't planned for was an insurance man. I spent 3 days doing nothing visible. I went to work. I came home. I had dinner with my wife, who talked about her second graders, and a faculty meeting, and a recipe she wanted to try on the weekend. And I listened and I responded, and I passed the salt when she asked for it. I am not proud of how easy that was. I am not certain what it says about me that I could sit across from her at that table and feel almost nothing except a cold, clear, focused purpose. What I was doing those 3 days was thinking. The same thing I used to do before a complex negotiation, laying out the variables, understanding the timeline, figuring out where leverage actually lived. My daughter's attorney was good, but he was working on her case. I needed someone working on mine. I called a friend from my industry. We had worked together years ago, a man who now ran a forensic accounting firm that worked primarily on insurance fraud and divorce asset recovery. He owed me a favor from 2009 involving a claim dispute that would have cost him his license. I had never called it in. I called it in now. He went to work quietly. I had given him everything I had, bank statements I'd photographed without my wife knowing, business registration records I'd pulled online, property records. It is remarkable what is public record, if you know where to look. I had spent 3 decades knowing where to look. What he found over the following 2 weeks was worse than I had imagined, and I had imagined quite a bit. The business, the commercial real estate consulting LLC he had started, had a second owner, a silent partner whose name I recognized immediately and whose involvement clarified everything I had been unable to square. My wife was the silent partner. She had been funneling money into that business for over a year. Not enormous amounts, careful amounts, but consistent, documented, and entirely without my knowledge. She had been funding his exit plan, and her own. I am going to tell you something that might surprise you. When I got that report from my friend, I didn't feel rage. I want to be clear about that, because I think people expect rage, and I understand why. But what I felt was something much quieter and much colder. It was the feeling of understanding finally the complete shape of something. The way you feel when the last piece of a puzzle goes in, and the picture is exactly as bad as you suspected, but at least now you can see it whole. My daughter and I had dinner that Friday. We didn't speak in front of her husband. We had gotten careful about phones, about what we said and where. We were, the two of us, conducting a parallel investigation inside what looked, from the outside, like an ordinary family with ordinary friction. We made a decision. We were not going to confront. We were going to document, organize, and then act, legally, completely, and in a way they would not see coming until it was already done. My daughter filed first. Her attorney was ready. The filing included a forensic accounting report, documentation of the asset transfers, and a motion to freeze the LLC pending discovery. It was served on a Wednesday morning, while he was at what he believed was a routine meeting, a meeting that had in fact been arranged through a mutual acquaintance to ensure he was in a specific place at a specific time. I filed the same afternoon. My wife came home that evening to find the papers on the kitchen counter, next to the sugar jar, where I always left things I needed her to see. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I wasn't drinking. She stood there with the papers in her hand for a long time. She didn't say anything immediately. I didn't either. "How long have you known?" she said finally. "Long enough to do this correctly," I said. She put the papers down. She picked them up. She sat down at the table across from me, which was something I had not expected. She looked suddenly very tired. Not guilty. She didn't look guilty the way people do when they're caught doing something small. She looked tired the way people look when they have been carrying something very heavy for a long time and have finally, against their will, been relieved of it. "I'm sorry," she said. And then, after a moment, "I know that's not enough." "No," I agreed. "It isn't." That was the last real conversation we had in that house. She left 2 weeks later. She went to stay with her sister in another state. I helped her pack, not because I owed her that, but because I had been married to her for 38 years, and I could not, in the end, be smaller than I wanted to be. I carried boxes to her car. I did not help her carry them up to her sister's guest room. That was where my assistance ended. My son-in-law had a worse 2 months than my wife did. The forensic accounting report was thorough in the specific way only a man who has spent a career detecting financial concealment can be thorough. His attorney, from what my daughter told me, was not pleased. The LLC was untangled in a manner that was, legally, quite educational for everyone involved. My daughter recovered significantly more than she would have recovered without it. I am satisfied with that outcome in the specific way I am satisfied when a case resolves correctly. He did not keep the house. He did not keep the shoes, as far as I know, though that was never confirmed. I want to tell you about the night after the papers were filed, because I think this is the part that matters most. My daughter came over. She brought food from the Italian place she knew I liked, the one her mother and I used to go to when she was in high school, which is a complicated thing to love, but which I still love anyway. We ate at the kitchen table. We didn't talk about attorneys or depositions or asset schedules. We talked about other things. We talked about her when she was 7 years old and convinced she was going to be an archaeologist. We talked about my knee and whether I was finally going to do the surgery. We talked about the geese at the park, which I had apparently mentioned during one of our planning calls and which she found funnier than I expected. At some point, she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I'm glad you came home early that day." I thought about that Audi, parked crooked in my driveway. I thought about the brown leather bag with the gold clasp. I thought about 38 years, and the garden along the back fence, and the stone path Elaine had laid herself, one piece at a time. "Yeah," I said. "Me too. There are things I have lost that I am not going to pretend I haven't lost. The marriage, the version of my life I thought I had. Certain illusions about the people closest to me that, once you lose them, you cannot retrieve no matter how much you might want to. I am 63 years old and I am starting over in a way I never imagined I would have to, and there are mornings when that fact sits on my chest like something physical. But there are also things I have kept. My house, my daughter, my clarity about what I value and who I am and what I am unwilling to accept. Those things feel more real to me now than they did before. The way anything feels more real after you've had to fight to keep it. My daughter and I have dinner most Sundays now. She is doing well. She is, I think, lighter than she was a year ago. Lighter in the way you get when you have finally put down something you were never supposed to be carrying. I recognize it because I feel it too. I am not a dramatic man. I do not have a triumphant ending for you, some moment of public vindication, some scene where the truth comes out in a crowded room and justice lands like a hammer. It didn't happen that way. It happened in courtrooms and conference calls, and a kitchen in the late afternoon, with papers next to the sugar jar. But I will tell you this. The last time I sat at that table with her, the night she left, she asked me, almost as an afterthought, almost like she already knew the answer, "Were you angry?" I thought about that for a moment. "No," I said. "Not really." She looked at me then with something I couldn't quite read, and she nodded, slowly, like that was the most frightening answer I could have given. Maybe she was right. Maybe the thing she should have been afraid of all along wasn't my anger. It was my patience.